The billionaire's mansion had seen countless events over the years, but that evening felt different from the very beginning. The grand hall was glowing with warm lights hanging from crystal chandeliers, and the floors were polished so clean that guests could see their reflections as they walked. Expensive perfumes filled the air, mixed with the faint scent of fresh flowers arranged along every corner of the room. People arrived in long cars, stepping out with rich clothes, shiny shoes, and proud smiles. They laughed loudly, greeting one another with big gestures, showing off their jewelry, and talking about business deals as if money was easier to collect than air. A few of them stood near the buffet table discussing luxury vacations, while others posed for photos in front of the giant staircase that seemed to reach the ceiling like a piece of art. Everyone knew the billionaire was going to give a speech that night. It was supposed to be one of those moments where he reminded the world how powerful he was, how successful, how unstoppable. People had come expecting him to talk about new projects, new companies, or some impressive milestone that ordinary people could only dream of. That was the pattern. That was the image he always maintained. But what no one knew was that he had been feeling different for a long time. Inside his chest, something heavy had been building up, something he could not explain to anyone, not even to himself fully. He had been moving through life like a man trapped behind glass. People could see him, admire him, fear him, envy him, but no one actually knew him. He had everything the world praises: money, status, influence, respect, but somehow all of it felt empty. And that night, he wanted to say something real, something unusual, something that might finally reveal the truth he had buried inside for too long. The guests gathered as the soft music faded. A hush spread through the hall as his assistant gently tapped the microphone to announce his arrival. Everyone turned toward the stage as the billionaire stepped onto it, dressed in a simple suit instead of the extravagant ones he usually wore. Some guests whispered to each other, wondering why he looked so serious. Others raised their glasses, expecting another powerful speech that would impress them. But when he began speaking, the room slowly shifted. "I have lived a long time among loud voices," he said, his tone calm but distant. "Voices that praise, voices that criticize, voices that pretend. But somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to hear my own." The audience looked at each other, confused. This was not the confident, sharp businessman they knew. This was someone else, someone quieter, someone softer. He continued, "Life becomes strange when you have everything. People call it success, but sometimes success becomes a wall so tall and so silent that you forget what real life sounds like." A few guests laughed under their breath, thinking he was being overly dramatic. Others frowned, trying to guess where he was going with this. Maybe it was a metaphor. Maybe he was talking about competition, or pressure, or business risks. But his voice didn't sound like he was giving a motivational talk. It sounded lonely. He spoke again, slower this time. "I used to believe that people around me cared about who I was, but over the years I realized they were only looking at my wealth. You may not notice it, but when you stop being a person and become a symbol, the world stops hearing you." A few younger businessmen nodded, as if they understood, but it was clear that no one truly did. They had gathered expecting entertainment, power, and drama, not vulnerability, not truth. He said, "You may think loneliness comes from being alone, but trust me, the worst loneliness happens in a room full of people who don't know you." This time, the room grew even more silent. His words were hitting harder than anyone expected, yet the meaning still slipped past most of them. They didn't know what he was talking about. They didn't live his life. They had not felt the weight he carried. He stepped away from the microphone for a moment, rubbing his hands together as if trying to steady himself. Then he looked at the crowd and said something even stranger. "Inside this house tonight," he said, "someone knows exactly what I am talking about. Someone understands these words better than anyone in this room, but I doubt any of you are that person." People exchanged surprised glances. Who could he be referring to? A business partner? A family member? A mentor? The guests whispered among themselves in confusion. Some giggled nervously, thinking he was trying to be mysterious. Others rolled their eyes, convinced he was simply trying a new style of speech to seem deep and philosophical. But the billionaire didn't smile. He didn't look amused or theatrical. He looked tired. Very tired. He ended the speech abruptly, saying, "I hope someone hears what I'm truly saying. Someone who doesn't look at me the way the world does." Then he stepped down from the stage and walked back into the crowd. People clapped out of habit, not out of understanding. They didn't know what else to do. They whispered behind their hands, making guesses about whether he was sick, stressed, or simply changing into a new kind of businessman, but the truth was simpler and deeper than anything they could imagine. As he moved through the room, faces turned toward him eagerly, hoping to say something impressive or clever, but he wasn't looking at them. His eyes kept drifting around the hall, almost searching for something or someone, without even knowing what exactly he was hoping to find. The music started again, gentle and soft, but the atmosphere felt strange. People didn't know how to react. They tried to shift back into normal conversations, yet the billionaire's strange words lingered like a faint echo that refused to disappear. A pair of guests near the desert table whispered, "What on earth was he talking about?" Another man replied, "Probably some deep business lesson. These rich people talk in riddles." A group near the staircase joked quietly, "Maybe he read too many inspirational books this morning." They laughed, but not out of joy, out of discomfort. They didn't know how else to handle the unfamiliar truth hiding behind his speech. Meanwhile, the billionaire stood near a corner, watching his guests, feeling more distant from them than ever before. He had spoken from his heart, but none of them had understood, not even a little. He wondered if he had made a mistake speaking honestly. Maybe he should have stuck to talking about profits, stocks, growth, and business achievements. Those topics always pleased the crowd, but for the first time, he hadn't been able to pretend. He sighed quietly, looking down at the floor as if trying to gather pieces of himself. In a hall full of glitter, laughter, and luxury, he felt like he was standing in a place that didn't belong to him anymore. And then, far behind the crowd, near the doorway where staff usually passed silently, something unexpected happened. A quiet voice whispered, barely loud enough for a few heads to turn, "I understand." The words floated through the air so softly that they almost disappeared, but somehow, the billionaire heard them. His head lifted, his eyes widened slightly, and something inside him shifted. The guests looked around, confused, trying to find who had spoken, but no one could see the person clearly from where they stood. The voice repeated, this time a little louder, "I understood everything you said." The hall began to fall into a deeper silence than before. The musicians stopped playing. Conversations froze mid-sentence for the first time that evening. The billionaire felt his heart beat faster, not from nerves, not from fear, but from a strange spark of hope. Someone had heard him, someone had truly understood, and whoever that person was, it wasn't one of the wealthy guests. That it was coming from the back of the room, from a simple uniform, from someone no one expected to speak. The maid. She stood there quietly, holding a small tray near her chest, her eyes gentle but steady, and just like that, the night took a turn that no one in that mansion would ever forget. The next morning began like any other inside the massive house, but something felt different. The staff walked around quietly, whispering to each other about the strange scene from the night before. No one said it openly, but everyone had the same question in their mind. Why had the billionaire spoken in such an unusual way? And how did the quiet maid understand him instantly when not even the closest advisors could? The billionaire himself woke up earlier than usual. He didn't tell anyone, but he had spent half the night thinking about the moment when the maid stepped forward and translated his words with such calm confidence. He wasn't angry. In fact, he was surprised at himself, at the room's reaction, and especially at her. He had always believed that people understood him only because of his position and wealth, but the way she interpreted his speech made him realize something uncomfortable. Maybe he wasn't as clear as he thought, and maybe someone he barely noticed saw him more clearly than all those powerful people sitting at his table. Downstairs in the staff dining room, the maid moved quietly as usual. She never tried to draw attention to herself. She just wanted to do her work, keep her job, and stay out of trouble. Other staff members approached her slowly, trying not to overwhelm her. They weren't jealous. They were just curious. One cleaner leaned in. "What happened yesterday? How did you understand him like that?" She didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to sound proud or pretend she was special, so she kept her answer simple. "I just listened," she said softly. "That's all." But as soon as she said it, she felt the weight of her own words. She had always been a listener. She listened when the staff talked about their problems, when the guests argued, when the billionaire walked through the hallways speaking in that peculiar manner. Most people ignored the tone and focused only on the power he carried, but she had paid attention. She heard the pauses. She noticed the way he used certain words when he was nervous, tired, or frustrated. She never spoke of it before, but she had understood him long before that night, while she was clearing the breakfast table. A senior staff member approached her and quietly said, "He wants to see you." Her heart dropped. She didn't expect this so soon. She thought maybe he would call her later or perhaps not at all, letting the whole scene fade away. but being called so early meant something serious. She wiped her hands quickly, straightened her clothes, and followed the staff member through the hallway. The billionaire was waiting in one of the smaller sitting rooms, a place he rarely used. He chose it on purpose because he didn't want to intimidate her. When she stepped inside, he looked up, and for the first time she saw something almost gentle in his expression. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing until he insisted. This was the first time he had ever told her to sit in his presence. He began speaking in the same way he had spoken the night before, his words in that unusual tone, layered with hidden meaning. Again, she understood, not because she was trained, not because she studied him like a book, but because she simply listened and paid attention to him in a way others didn't. Single quotes. She spoke slowly, explaining each sentence he said in clear words, carefully matching the intention behind his tone. The billionaire watched her closely, not saying anything else. He wasn't testing her anymore. He was learning something about himself through her. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said something in plain, simple language, something she had never heard from him before. "You weren't afraid yesterday." She didn't know how to respond at first. She looked down at her hands. "I was," she admitted, "but I didn't want you to feel misunderstood." Her words hit him harder than she expected. No one in his life ever talked that way. People wanted his approval, his money, his attention. They didn't think about whether he felt misunderstood. Yet this made someone who had almost nothing thought about him in that way. He asked her how long she had been working there. She told him. He asked where her family lived. She answered politely but didn't go into detail. She wasn't used to opening up to someone of his status, and he didn't push her. They talked for a while, and for the first time in years, the billionaire felt like someone was actually hearing him, not just nodding to impress him. He realized how unusual it was that he didn't feel guarded. He didn't feel judged. He felt human. After their talk, he dismissed her gently, telling her she could return to her duties. But when she stepped out of the room, she noticed something strange. Many of the senior staff were standing nearby, pretending to work but clearly curious about what was happening behind that door. She didn't say anything. She simply went back to work, but she could feel the shift in the air. Everyone was watching her now, out of envy but out of surprise. She had broken some invisible barrier the night before, and now nothing felt the same. The entire household began paying more attention to the way the billionaire behaved. They noticed how he paused before giving orders, how he looked thoughtful instead of demanding. He wasn't angry or annoyed. He seemed unsettled, but in a way that hinted at growth. Meanwhile, the maid tried to act as if nothing had changed. She didn't want others to think she was trying to climb higher or gain favor. But the truth was, her life had changed the moment she spoke up. She had stepped into a bigger world without meaning to, and now she was part of something she didn't fully understand yet. Later that afternoon, a group of advisors approached the billionaire with folders and schedules. They spoke quickly, explaining business matters, upcoming meetings, and project deadlines. He listened, but for the first time, he noticed how rushed and careless their words were. They didn't speak to him. They spoke at him. They didn't try to understand him. They just wanted to move on to their next task. He thought of the maid's steady voice and how she repeated his thoughts with clarity and compassion. Her presence made him see the difference between being heard and being understood. That night, the household gathered for an important dinner with key partners. Everyone expected the billionaire to stand and speak again. This time, people wondered what would happen. Would he speak the same way? And if he did, would the maid step forward again? When he finally began his speech, he used his usual tone, full of meaning hidden behind his strange way of speaking. Once again, the room froze. Guests exchanged nervous looks. Staff stared at their feet. People glanced toward the maid, waiting, but something different happened this time. The billionaire stopped speaking midway, cleared his throat, and switched to simple, direct language. The room gasped quietly. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And he did that because of her. Though he didn't say it, everyone in the room knew who had influenced him. Only one person had shown him what it felt like to be understood. The maid stood respectfully at the back of the room, her eyes lowered, but her heart was racing. She wasn't seeking attention, but she felt something deep inside, something like hope. People didn't whisper about her anymore. They watched her with respect now, not surprised that her life had changed. His life had changed, and a new kind of silence filled the room, a silence full of realization, curiosity, and the beginning of something none of them saw coming. The morning after the dinner felt unusually calm. The staff moved around with a quieter sort of energy, as if they were trying to understand the shift happening inside the house. The billionaire was no longer acting the same way. Something in him seemed softer, more thoughtful, and people were careful not to disturb this new mood. Everyone knew change was happening, but no one could guess where it was leading. The maid arrived early, as always. She carried her tools and began cleaning the hallway, pretending everything was normal. But people didn't look at her the way they used to. They greeted her with respect, not because she asked for it, but because they now understood she had done something none of them ever dared to do. She had stepped into a room full of powerful people and helped the one man nobody thought needed help. She didn't think of herself as someone special. She still felt nervous when she crossed paths with senior staff. She still walked quietly, avoiding unnecessary attention. But deep inside, she felt a strange mix of fear and courage. Fear, because she didn't know what would happen next. Courage, because she knew she did the right thing. Around mid-morning, the billionaire's assistant approached her. There was a soft knock on the doorframe where she was cleaning. "He wants to see you again," the assistant said gently. Her heart thumped. She wiped her hands, fixed her uniform, and followed him through the hallway. This time, she wasn't shaken as much. She took slow breaths, telling herself she had nothing to worry about. When she entered the sitting room, the billionaire was already there, waiting in the same chair as yesterday. He looked tired but calm, as if he had spent the entire night thinking deeply. He motioned for her to sit again. She obeyed. For the first minute, he didn't speak. He looked at the table, the carpet, the window everywhere except at her. Then, finally, he spoke in his usual tone, the strange one that confused everyone except her. It was softer today, not as heavy, not as complicated. She listened carefully and translated his words into clear, simple sentences. As she spoke, he watched her closely. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct her. He just listened, a rare thing for a man who usually talked more than he heard. When she finished, he leaned forward. "You understand more than most people," he said quietly. She didn't know if he meant it as a compliment or an observation, so she answered honestly. "I just try to listen." He nodded slowly, almost grateful for her answer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he surprised her by asking, "Do you know why I speak the way I do?" She shook her head. "People think it is confidence," he said, "but it is not. It started years ago, long before all this wealth and all these people around me. It is a habit I never learned to break." He paused before continuing. "When I speak like that, it is because I'm afraid of not being understood, so I hide my real meaning behind complicated words." His confession was unexpected, almost fragile. She had never imagined he struggled with something like that. To her, he always seemed strong, in control, and almost unreachable. She lowered her voice and replied, "Sometimes people hide their feelings in strange ways, but you don't need to hide them from me." He looked up and there was something vulnerable in his eyes. He didn't say anything more about it, but she could tell he appreciated her words. Their conversation ended with him giving her a simple instruction. "Help me speak clearly." At first, she didn't fully understand what he meant. Did he want her to translate every time he spoke? Did he want lessons? Or did he simply want someone to remind him when he was slipping back into his old habits? But he didn't explain further. He dismissed her with a soft thanks, a word she had never heard from him. Directly before, she left the room feeling confused but strangely hopeful. Something was changing between them, but she didn't know what it would grow into. She only knew it wasn't something negative. Later that afternoon, the billionaire had a meeting with a group of business partners. The staff stood nearby, ready to serve tea or adjust the room if needed. The maid had moved to another part of the house, but she could still sense the tension. Everyone wondered if he would return to the old way of speaking. When the meeting began, he tried to speak normally, but halfway through his sentence, he slipped into his familiar complicated tone. The room stiffened. The advisors exchanged nervous looks, unsure on how to react. Then something unexpected happened. He stopped. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to pull himself back. He opened them again and repeated the sentence in simple words. The room relaxed. People nodded. The atmosphere changed. The billionaire didn't notice it, but the staff watching through the glass door did. They whispered among themselves, "He's different. He's trying. This is new." And although none of them said it aloud, they all knew the reason. The maid's calm voice had made him see something he had ignored for years. In the evening, when the house grew quiet, the maid went to the kitchen to help clean after dinner. She wasn't required to do it, but she liked staying busy. It kept her mind from worrying. The cook walked over to her with a smile. "You know," he whispered, "you're braver than all of us." She blushed and shook her head. "I just did what felt right." He laughed softly. "Sometimes that's the bravest thing someone can do." Word was spreading through the entire household. Some people admired her. Some were inspired by her. Others were simply shocked that someone so gentle could make such a big difference. Later that night, when she finally returned to the small room where she slept, she sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the wall. Her thoughts swirled. Why did he choose her? Why did he trust her when he had dozens of experts around him? Was she now expected to stay close to him every time he spoke? Would this make other people resent her? She wasn't afraid of hard work. What scared her was the sudden attention. She had lived quietly for so long. Being noticed felt strange, almost uncomfortable. But she couldn't ignore the truth. She had changed his world, and in return, her own world had shifted to dot. The next day, the billionaire requested her presence again. This time, he wanted to practice communicating more clearly. They sat across from each other while he tried to express himself plainly. He struggled. She guided him gently, sometimes correcting him with patience, sometimes waiting for him to find the right words. He wasn't embarrassed to make mistakes in front of her. That surprised him. He had never allowed himself to be vulnerable around anyone, not advisors, not partners, not even friends. But with her, he didn't feel judged. During one practice session, he asked her, "Why do you think people never correct me?" She answered with a soft truth, "Because they're afraid of losing something." He didn't respond right away. He thought deeply about it. He knew she was right. People followed him for what he could offer them. They didn't dare tell him when he was wrong or confusing. But she had nothing to gain. She spoke up because she cared. As days passed, the billionaire began depending on her without fully realizing it. Whenever he needed to prepare for a meeting or a speech, he asked her to listen. Whenever he struggled to express a thought, he asked her for help. The staff noticed her walking into rooms she had never entered before. They noticed how comfortable he seemed when she was nearby. They noticed the calm way she guided him, and the respect he showed her in return. People whispered, but the whispers were no longer mocking, they were filled with curiosity. Who was this quiet maid who had managed to touch the heart of a man who seemed unreachable? Why did he trust her more than all the people he paid so generously? What did she understand that others didn't? The maid didn't know the answers either. She only knew she was following her instinct, the instinct to help, to listen, to bring clarity where there was confusion. But something inside her warned her that change always brings consequences. And soon, something unexpected would happen, something that would test the bond forming between her and the billionaire, something that would reveal whether this connection was strong or fragile. What neither of them knew was that the real turning point was waiting just ahead. The days that followed moved quietly at first, but something deeper was shifting inside the mansion. The billionaire's behavior kept surprising everyone. He became calmer, more patient, and more open to listening. Even the people who had worked with him for years couldn't explain the sudden gentleness in his voice. They didn't know what caused it, but they sensed that the maid had played a role in this change. She tried to stay in the background, doing her tasks the same way she had always done. She didn't want to be treated differently. But no matter how carefully she walked through the halls, people noticed her now. Some of the staff smiled at her with quiet admiration. Others watched her with a mix of confusion and respect, as if she were carrying a secret they couldn't decode. One morning, as she polished the large hallway mirror, the assistant came to her again. He spoke softly, almost respectfully this time. "He wants you in the meeting room." She nodded, put her cloth down, and followed him. But she could feel her heart racing. Each time she met the billionaire, the situation felt heavier. She didn't know what he wanted today, and her mind filled with worries. What if she made a mistake? What if people misunderstood her involvement with him? What if helping him created problems she wasn't prepared for? When she entered the room, the billionaire was standing near the window. He turned, and she noticed he looked troubled. Not angry, just heavy, like something was weighing on him. He motioned her to sit. She waited for him to speak. After a long pause, he said, "There's a conference next week. Important people will attend. I need to speak there." She didn't know why he looked so worried. He attended events like this many times before, but she understood the real fear beneath his quiet voice. He wasn't afraid of the conference, he was afraid of slipping back into his complicated speech in front of so many people. She spoke gently. "You will speak well. You're trying, and you're improving every day." He walked slowly across the room, hands behind his back. "People expect perfection from me," he said, "but perfection is the thing I struggle to show." She remained calm and answered honestly, "People will understand you if you speak from your heart. You don't need to impress everyone." He looked at her, almost stunned by her simple words. No one had ever told him he didn't need to impress people. His whole life revolved around that pressure. He nodded slowly. "I want you to help me prepare." She agreed quietly. They spent the next hour practicing. She listened to him repeat lines, helping him rephrase complicated sentences into simple, clear speech. It wasn't easy for him. Old habits kept returning. Sometimes frustration flickered in his eyes, but he never raised his voice at her. Instead, he listened when she gently corrected him. Their practice continued over the next several days. The staff noticed her entering rooms usually reserved for private meetings. They whispered among themselves, but the tone had changed. No one saw jealousy anymore. Instead, there was curiosity, almost admiration, for her ability to calm a man who intimidated everyone else. One afternoon, as they practiced in a quiet library, he suddenly stopped speaking and asked her something unexpected. "Do you ever wish for more than this job?" Her breath caught. She didn't want to say anything that sounded ungrateful. She had been through difficult times before working there, and this job had given her stability. But she also had dreams she never spoke of. "I'm thankful for my work," she said softly, "but everyone has dreams." He studied her quietly. "What is yours?" She hesitated. No one had ever asked her this. Not in such a personal, sincere way. "I want to learn more," she finally said. "Not just cleaning or serving. I want to understand life better. Maybe help people someday. But I don't know how." A slow expression formed on his face, something like respect mixed with sadness. "You already help people," he said. "More than you realize." Her cheeks warmed in embarrassment. She didn't see herself that way. She was simply doing what felt right. A few days before the conference, something unexpected happened. A group of senior executives came to the mansion for a private discussion. They noticed how often the maid was near the billionaire, guiding him quietly. Some of them didn't like it. They felt her presence was out of place, and they worried that she was gaining too much influence. During a break in the meeting, one of them approached her in the hallway. His voice sounded polite, but his eyes carried sharpness. "Is he relying on you now?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She chose her words carefully. "I only help when he asks." The man stared at her for a moment, then replied, "Be careful. People may misunderstand your intentions." She felt a cold knot in her stomach. She had feared this moment. She knew her quiet involvement could create tension. She wasn't trying to climb higher or gain anything, but powerful people didn't always see things the right way. That evening, while she helped prepare the dining room, she kept thinking about the executive's warning. She worried about being blamed later or accused of stepping out of her place. She didn't want trouble. Just before dinner, the billionaire entered the room. He noticed her expression immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then told him what happened. She didn't complain. She simply repeated the man's words. The billionaire listened silently. Then something shifted in his face. For the first time, she saw a hint of anger not directed at her, but at the way she was treated. "You have nothing to fear," he said firmly. "No one here has the right to intimidate you." She didn't say anything, but she felt a strange warmth in her chest. His words didn't erase the worry, but they gave her strength. The next day, something even more surprising happened. The billionaire gathered his executives again. This time, the maid wasn't in the room, but she overheard fragments as she passed by. He told them he was working on improving his communication. He made it clear that the maid had been helping him because she understood him in a way no one else did. He spoke proudly, not protectively or defensively, just truthfully. "What she offers is something none of you have given me," he said. "She listens." The room fell silent. His words carried weight. They weren't said in anger. They were said with clarity. It changed the way the staff and executives looked at her. From that moment on, they understood she wasn't just a random maid who corrected his speech. She was someone he trusted. On the day of the conference, the mansion buzzed with nervous energy. The billionaire dressed carefully, and the staff moved quickly to prepare everything. Before he left, he called the maid to his study. She stood quietly as he adjusted his tie. "I want you to be there," he said. Her eyes widened. "But you're the one who helped me," he interrupted gently. "I speak better when you're near." She didn't know what to say. The idea of entering a place filled with powerful, wealthy people terrified her, but she saw sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't ordering her. He was asking her. She nodded. At the conference hall later that day, she stood at the side of the room near the curtains, keeping her head down, but she watched him step onto the stage with confidence she had never seen before. He began speaking. At first, everyone thought he would use his usual complicated tone, but he didn't. His words were simple, clear, and steady. He hesitated only once, and when he glanced toward her, she gave him a small nod. He continued, and the room listened, truly listened. When he finished, the applause filled the hall. Even people who never liked him clapped with genuine respect. As he stepped off the stage, he walked past the crowd and looked directly at her. He didn't smile widely, not his style, but his eyes carried gratitude. Later, when they returned to the mansion, the staff greeted them with pride. She felt shy, overwhelmed, and unsure of what this meant for her future. Everything had changed so quickly, but the truth was clear now. She had become someone important to him, not because of status or power, but because she understood him in a way no one else ever had. Yet she also sensed that this story wasn't finished. There was still more to unfold, more challenges ahead, and more unexpected moments waiting in the shadows. And deep inside, she wondered, now that the world had seen a new side of him, what would happen to her place in his life.